I want to begin with a statement the Speaker of Iran's parliament just published. He said Iran has been receiving multiple approaches from neighboring countries about building a new security framework and economic partnership across the region. According to him, the U.S. has repeatedly jeopardized the security of its own regional allies through pressure tactics and by ignoring their interests, all in the name of protecting Israel, to the point where those allies briefly feared for their own survival. His view is that real, lasting peace and security can only come from within the region itself, from a homegrown, independent order, not from outside powers. So, my question is, what exactly is this regional understanding that seems to be forming across West Asia, and what do we currently know about it?
I think that sentence where he says that they for a moment they saw their entire existence uh,
On the line.
disappearing on the line is an important uh, part of the tweet, and that shows that they knew that how vulnerable they were and how close they were to having their regimes collapsed. And this is something that we discussed during the war, during the fighting, both during the 40 days and during the 13 days. I've been saying this for many years, but during the war, I was saying that the existence of these uh, regimes in the Persian Gulf uh, is it will depend on the will of the Iranian people, and if they push too hard or if they allow the Americans to go too far, then they will cease to exist. And apparently, they've they've come to understand that. So what Dr. Ghalibaf is saying is that the only way out of this situation is for these countries to ignore the Americans and establish a joint regional security mechanism. The Americans obviously don't care about any of these countries. They don't care about the leaders, even though they send trillions of dollars to the United States and they purchase their bonds and they put their money in their banks and they purchase assets and they buy their weapons, which are worthless pieces of junk for them at least, because they were not unable to do anything against Iran during the war. It was Americans. So the smart thing to do would be for them to ignore Trump, ignore the United States, and stand on their own feet, become sovereign, and set up a mutual security arrangement in the region, because every country in this region wants and needs peace and stability. Iran needs it. The countries in the Persian Gulf all need it. That's how their economies thrive. The United States doesn't care about our security. They care about the Israeli regime. And so they're willing to sacrifice the lives of people across the region and across the world, for that matter, for the sake of Netanyahu and for the sake of Zionism and the Zionist regime. But we'll see, because I think that we are not out of the woods at all if the United States attempts to impose some new sanctions regime to uh, force neighboring countries to cut off economic ties with Iran, then we are not in a ceasefire. And the countries that assisted the United States in this war and continue to assist them in this war, as we speak, they are they would be adversaries. So if Iran is not going to be able to do business, they won't be able to do business. If Iran's ports are not functioning, their ports will not function. It won't just be the Strait of Hormuz anymore. It could be the airports. It could be the Caucasus, depending on who cooperates. I mean, if, for example, Baku uh, blocks cooperation, or let's say Russian and Iranian trade, then the fact that Baku transports its oil or exports oil to the Israeli regime to help it in these wars, the Iranians could punish it for that. Or if the Emirates moves to try to help strangle the Iranian economy, and so on. So the point is that hopefully the United States will fail in hurting anyone in this region. Iran wants a stable and quiet region where the people and the Iranian people, of course, and its allies in the Axis of Resistance, among others, can live in peace and prosperity. But if the United States escalates, then I think that part of the tweet of the Iranian Speaker of Parliament is important. That these countries already saw, these regimes already saw that their fate was, their future was severely threatened, and so they should take note. They should remember that in the days and weeks ahead.
Trump said 2 days ago that people are looking for alternatives to the Strait of Hormuz, and his answer was places like Texas, Alaska, and Louisiana. Who would actually be satisfied with that? Would the GCC countries accept it?
He doesn't care. He doesn't care about them. I mean, that's also part of Dr. Ghalibaf's tweet. Trump doesn't care about these countries. The Americans don't care about these countries. I mean, the political elite. They only care for them as long as they're milking them, and as long as these regimes pursue the interests of the Israeli regime. That's how it's always been. None of them have done anything that harms U.S. or Israeli regime interests in the last few decades. None of them. I mean, Qatar sometimes pretends to do otherwise, but Qatar is the same as everyone else. Al Jazeera is just a TV channel that helps. It's sort of like controlled opposition. I mean, there are good people in Al Jazeera, no doubt, but it's controlled opposition. And if the Americans wanted it to be shut down, they'd shut it down today. So Qatar, the Saudis, the Emiratis, they all they may not like each other, but they all obey the United States. But Trump has pushed them in a direction which has put their entire future at risk, and he'll do that for the sake of the Israeli regime. And they've figured that out. The problem is, will they do anything? The question is, will they do anything about it? They know that they're not important. They know that they have no significance to the United States, except for the fact that the United States benefits from them. But in any case, they would never. The United States would never sacrifice the Israeli regime for them. So throughout this war and the fighting, we saw that the United States was using air defense capabilities to protect Israel, not these countries. These countries were on the front line of the U.S. war against Iran. They were the forces on the front line assisting Trump, but Trump wasn't assisting them. He was assisting Netanyahu. And Nima, the interesting thing is that now that these countries have been so severely damaged, and they're every day it's getting worse. For the Saudis, for the Emiratis, for the Kuwaitis, for the Qataris, they have lots of assets in the United States. They have lots of bonds in the United States. Do you think that the United States will let them sell those bonds to rebuild their country, to sustain themselves? There's not a chance in the world. They may let them have take a little bit here and a little bit there, but that money is gone. The United States is never going to return any of that money to these regimes. They have to leave that money there, and if they're lucky, as long as there's no collapse, they'll be able to take, some profit from their bonds. But that's basically it.
We know Scott Bessent and J.D. Vance are talking about putting massive economic pressure on Iran. Nothing new for Iran's economy, historically. But what's different this time compared to before?
I don't know what they plan. Obviously, you're correct. This is not new for the Iranian economy, and Iran has lived with maximum pressure sanctions for many years. The Europeans and the Americans and their allies, they've tried to strangle the Iranian people for decades, which says more than enough about what these regimes are really all about. They are brutal and barbaric. I've always said that the most inhumane regimes on this planet are Western regimes. The most barbaric, the most backward, uh, the most vicious. When once you've survived chemical attacks, you that y- like many in Iran, you have a better understanding what the free world and the civilized world actually means. But so when they target ordinary people, they want to bring them to their knees, the entire country, so that they can get their way. That's the objective of the West. So children, yeah, kill them, have them die. I mean, after Gaza, it's obvious, but before Gaza, a lot of people really didn't see this. But that's what they did in Syria. They crushed Syria. They demonized the Syrian government for how evil it was and all that. But they were strangling the Syrian people, and they were funding ISIS and Al Qaeda and killing hundreds of thousands of people with their terror groups. Whatever the Syrian government was, they were infinitely worse. In Cuba, whatever the government is, they are infinitely worse. The Americans and those behind the sanctions regime, because they're targeting the whole population. And the same is true wherever they've used they've used food and medicine as weapons, just like in Gaza. Gaza was being strangled for decades, and the West had no problem with that. And it's being strangled now. Most of the people who die in Gaza, they die of illness and a lack of medicine, and because of food shortages, and because many people have certain needs that or a certain diet that they have to adhere to, and they can't, and they die. Hundreds of thousands have died in Gaza. There was a report saying that almost 40 million people, I think 38 million people from 1971 to 2021 uh, died as a result of Western sanctions. That's 40 million people. That's the entire that's like the population of Iraq. The whole country just wiped off the face of the earth by Western sanctions over 50 years. Across the world, of course. So, this is what we're dealing with. And so Iran obviously has to take these threats seriously. Now, what will the United States do? Will it try to bully neighbors like Pakistan and Turkey and Turkmenistan and Afghanistan and Azerbaijan and so on, and Iraq, to cut off all ties with Iran? Or what are they going to do? I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But first of all, Iran is if there's one country on this earth that is resilient to this sort of thing, it's Iran. It's Iran, for a host of reasons, not just their experience, but also their culture, their history, their religious ideology. But also, in addition to that, as I as I've always been saying, we have no ceasefire with the United States. There is no ceasefire. We are at war, and those countries that host U.S. bases are effectively at war with us. Those countries in the region, the same countries that Dr. Ghalibaf is addressing and saying, let's bring an end to this. If they don't bring an end to this, then they will suffer the consequences too. If we are not allowed to uh, bring in food for our children, these regimes won't be allowed to use their ports. They won't be able, Iran could shut down the airports. Everything is possible. So if they will not be able to assist the United States in strangling Iran, because the only way that the United States can strangle or attempt to strangle Iran is through these neighbors. China is not going to abide by this. Russia doesn't even have it's completely sanctioned. What more? I mean, how is the United States going to threaten Russia? And China's, China knows where its interests lie. But regional countries, some of them may be bullied into carrying out policies dictated by Trump. If that happens, uh, then the United States should expect an Iranian response. And the Iranians have an eye on the U.S. midterm elections. They have an eye on the U.S. midterm elections, and so I think, I mean, if I was an Iranian leader, I would say, okay, you're going to try to hurt me. I hear that your bond market's in big trouble. Well, let's see if I can make it worse. I hear that the Japanese currency is getting dangerously low. It's the devaluation is picking up speed. Let's see what we can do to make it worse. Let's see what we can do to force uh, Trump's hand to create a crisis with the bond market. I mean, there's so many things that Iran can do right now that can hurt Trump in the coming 2.5 months. That he should be terribly worried.
Let's talk about the land blockade, meaning Iran's neighboring countries cooperating to pressure Iran's economy. Two key countries here, as you mentioned, are Turkey and Pakistan, both of which have close ties with the United States, giving Washington real leverage over them. But when it comes to the Caspian Sea side, there's no one positioned to cut Iran off from Russia there. And correct me if I'm wrong, but Iran gets much of its wheat, cooking oil, and similar food supplies from Central Asia and Russia, meaning it doesn't even need to go through the Persian Gulf to receive them. The real vulnerability would be on the export side because of the blockade. So is the situation actually worse now than it was during the JCPOA withdrawal or under the Obama administration? Every U.S. administration seems to talk about crushing sanctions and maximum pressure. So how do you see Iran's position today? We also need to look at what's happened since February 28th. There was a major shift inside Iran because of the war the U.S. launched against it. This is something genuinely new. Younger generations, Gen Z in Iran, had never really experienced war or understood how devastating it can be. And that seems to have created a kind of unity inside the country since the war began, which appears to be growing. So, how do you view the resilience of the Iranian people as a result of this war, and how is Iran approaching the different ways it might manage its economic challenges given the pressure the U.S. is trying to apply?
Well, first of all, after Trump left the JCPOA, Iran's oil exports went down to almost zero for quite a long time. I don't remember how long it was, but let's say a couple of years.
Yeah.
So
At least, yeah.
at least, yeah. So Iran has survived without exporting oil, and Iran does have oil as we speak on the high seas because before the war, Iran had a lot of oil that it couldn't easily sell, and it was in tankers. It gradually sold that, and also at the beginning of the MOU, Iran had a lot of tankers in the Persian Gulf that were stuck, full of oil, that couldn't leave because of the siege. And then, as soon as the MOU was signed, those tankers left. There were tens of millions of barrels of oil. So Iran still has oil to sell, but at some point that will come to an end. But Iran still does export quantities of oil through different means, through the Persian Gulf, through um, Central Asia. So we've had that experience in the past. Second is what you said. The Iranian society is more united today than it's ever been since I was a teenager, and in some ways, probably even more so than then. Possibly, I don't. I'd have to think about that. But in any case, it's a very united country. In addition to that, we, as I said earlier, we're at war. There is no ceasefire. This is not like when Trump exited the JCPOA or when Obama first started the maximum pressure set campaign, because many people think it was Trump that did this. No, it was Obama who started the maximum pressure sanctions targeting ordinary Iranians. I think he called them crippling sanctions. And Trump, I think, when he revived them, he called them brutal sanctions. So they were, or maybe vice versa, but I think that's how it was. But so they were trying to cripple ordinary Iranians, try to brutalize ordinary Iranians, and of course, the entire West was with them. No one, expressed outrage in the West about this sort of behavior, just like with Cuba, just like with Venezuela, just like with Syria, just like with Iraq. Remember when they imposed the sanctions on Iraq, and at one point, after it was said that 500,000 children had died, and then they asked Madeleine Albright, and she infamously said, "Then we think it was yes, we think it was worth it." That's how the West behaves. That's who they are. They have no morality, zero. They pretend that they're civilized, but they're far from it. They're the least civilized. When you go by a Western embassy anywhere in the world, the people inside, they are uncivilized. They're the uncivilized ones. They're more uncivilized than anyone else because they represent this behavior. They represent this madness, this evilness. And of course, when you look at the Epstein files and you look at, when you look at Gaza, it becomes much more clear, all these things. You get a better grasp of how how these people are. In the past, sometimes people from Western embassies in Iran would want to see me, and I sometimes let them come and visit me on campus or elsewhere. But for the last couple of years, I just said I don't want to see any of them. It's just they're beyond. They're not worth my time. So this is what we're dealing with. I digress. Sorry, but in any case, um, so Iran has suffered hardship in the past, and now Iran, though, is different because we are at war. And so back then, when the Americans imposed sanctions, there wasn't much we could do about it except for struggle to survive. But now we have a coalition that is fighting against us. That coalition is on the other side of the Persian Gulf, a part of them. The Israeli regime, it's Jordan, it's these regimes. There are others too, but these are the ones who allowed U.S. bases to be used against us, and they not they not only are a part of this war, they are part of the 12-day war because U.S. planes which fueled Israeli fighter jets to bomb Iran would take off from these countries. They would use the jet fuel paid for by these countries, produced by these countries to fuel Israeli fighter jets to bomb Iran. So they participated in two wars. And then in the 1980s, these countries paid Saddam Hussein hundreds of billions of dollars. I mean, in today's money, it's much higher, but to kill Iranians. So they're at war with us. They're part of this war. So if the United States tries to strangle us, then these are the partners of the United States, and we can shut down everything. I mean, it's not the Strait of Hormuz is not if they're, as I said, if you shut down their ports, if you knock out their production, the Strait of Hormuz is not important. There's no debate anymore about how many barrels of oil went through today. That's over. That'll be over. If you knock out the facilities in Qatar, if you knock them out in Saudi Arabia, if you knock them out in the Emirates, who cares how many barrels of oil are going through tonight? It'll be zero pretty soon. So this is the United States is very vulnerable. And another difference between now and back then. Back then, China and Russia were much weaker than they are today. They were just beginning to rise, like Iran, and they were beginning to become more powerful. They were not confident enough to stand up to the United States. I mean, when the United States would impose sanctions on Iran in the UN Security Council, the Russians and the Chinese did not want any of those resolutions passed. But back then they were weak. So the most that they would do would be to water them down. But at the end of the day, they wouldn't veto them. Today, you see they veto all resolutions against Iran. So they're more confident, they're stronger, the United States is weaker, and they are more vulnerable to the United States. I mean, the United States is targeting them today, not like back then. Back then, they didn't want trouble with the United States. Now they have trouble with the United States and they have to push back. So there are a host of reasons why their behavior has changed. It's different today from back then. So Iran's position is very different for all these reasons, but there's also another thing, and that is Iran is much more is much more confident. After this war, many of us believed that we would win this war. We had no doubt, but many of us didn't. And now, those who didn't, those who thought we would collapse or we were vulnerable, who were very fearful, have a newfound confidence. And that is going to have a huge impact on the future of the confrontation.